Hello. On the screen behind me you can see an expert advisor running in the strategy tester. This expert advisor combines the CCI and two moving averages, and I'll show you today how to write this expert advisor. Before we start, I have to warn you, this is not a recommendation to use the strategy in this expert advisor. The strategy is only there as an example to be used for the programming. I'll also say I'm going to be showing this for both MQL4 and MQL5, and where there are differences in the code, I'll just switch between the two editors as I go. I'll just bring up the two editors here. I have changed the background color on the MQL5 editor just to make it a little easier for you to see. The MQL5 is on the right hand side of screen, and I've colored that background just to make it a little easier for you to see when I switch to MQL5. And I'll also go into the editor when I put this together and put a comment in the corner of the screen to show when I'm working on MQL4 or MQL5. But I'll be switching through these, or I'll be switching between these as I go. Now, in the past, I have tried creating totally separate videos for MQL4 and MQL5. I've tried working completely through MQL4 and then switching and doing the MQL5. And I've also tried, as I'm going to do today, where I switch between the two as I go. I'll be interested in your thoughts. If you have a strong preference one way or the other, then please leave a comment. I'm not saying that I'll change the way I do this in the future, but it does help me to understand what people prefer. So now let's look at the strategy that I'm going to be programming here today. Now, it's important to fully understand the strategy you're going to implement before writing an expert advisor. Don't just jump into the code and hope that it will evolve from there. So I've taken the time here to map out exactly what this strategy does. It's quite a simple strategy. Yours may be more complex, but I needed to fully understand the strategy before writing the expert advisor, and then the code just flows from those rules. First, this strategy uses a CCI, and it looks for that CCI crossing the 0 point of the CCI. It also uses two moving averages, a fast moving average and a slow moving average, and it looks for a cross of those two moving averages. The entry to the trade happens when, for a buy, the CCI crosses above 0 and the fast moving average crosses above the slow moving average. And these don't have to happen at the same time. In fact, very often that doesn't happen at the same time. All I'm looking for is that both have crossed above, and as soon as the second happens, then I'll take a buy entry, as long as the first hasn't invalidated. So what I mean by that, if the CCI, for example, crosses above 0 and then crosses below, and then the fast moving average crosses above the slow, that cross below of the CCI will invalidate the cross above. So they both have to remain above. And a sell entry is exactly the opposite. The CCI crosses below 0 and the fast moving average crosses below the slow moving average. Could be in either order, could be the moving average first and then the CCI, as long as they have both remained below, or so as long as CCI has remained below the 0 and the fast moving average is below the slow. And I'll take the entry as soon as the second of those happens. Exits are simpler. I'm just looking at the moving averages crossing for an exit. So I'll exit my buy positions if the fast moving average crosses below the slow moving average, and I'll exit the sell positions if the fast moving average moves above the slow moving average. Beginning with MQL4 here, I've already created the outline using the wizard, and I've placed this under Experts, Orchard, CCI2MA. As I usually do, I place everything in its own folder. And I've also tidied up the code a little bit. I don't like the way the comments are placed and the code is laid out. So I've used the wizard to create the outline, but then I've modified the structure a little bit. And I've already done the same on MQL5. Here is the first difference though. There is a property strict in MQL4. This was introduced at around build 600 in order to maintain backward compatibility so that older code would continue to compile, but newer code could use this property strict. That won't have any impact if you use it in MQL5, so it's harmless, but it's not needed. Apart from that, I've simply placed a comment block here, copyright, the link to a website, version number, property strict, and I've rewritten the trading rules. This is not a comprehensive description of the trading rules, but I like to at least put an outline in the beginning of the expert advisor, and it helps when I need to refer to something, and I've got it all inside my code here. Do note a couple of possible improvements here. There's currently no stop loss, so trades are placed with no stop loss and no take profit, which means if there's a significant market move, it could blow an account, and there's no take profit. So for a potential improvement, you might want to add a stop loss and take profit. There's also no check for open trades It's unusual but possible that an entry signal could be triggered twice before the trade is closed. So I simply haven't worried about that. You might want to build something in to check for existing trades first. Now I'm in the MQL5 editor, and here's the first real difference between MQL4 and MQL5. MQL5 or MT5 comes with this trade.mqh file, and that makes trade operations easier because it wraps up a number of the functions that you need to call to execute trades. So I'm going to include that file, and that gives me access to the ctrade class. So I'm simply declaring a variable called trade that is of type ctrade. Now also notice here that I have simply declared this as trade. There is no asterisk. This is not a pointer to a ctrade object. This is an actual variable of type ctrade. The difference is that I don't need to execute a new statement to create this. It's already created simply by declaring it, and I also don't need to worry about deleting it when the program completes. This is completely acceptable because trade itself is a stateless type object. It's simply there to execute trades and help with the execution of those trades. It's not maintaining any values that I need to retain later. So this is quite an acceptable as a tool type class. The trade.mqh file also includes further files that are supplied, and one of those is positioninfo.mqh, and that gives me access to a cPositionInfo class. And so I'm going to use that and declare a variable called positionInfo. This is also stateless, but it gives me access to the information on the currently selected position, and it's a little easier than calling the long-winded functions to get position information. Now back in MQL4, and the next thing we need to do is have some inputs. We need the values to apply to the CCI and the fast moving average, and then some general purpose values to apply to the trades. So first the CCI inputs, and the CCI has two inputs. The first one is a period. It's going to be calculated over, in my case the default will be 14 periods, and there's an applied price. Now I'm choosing price close. The default for a CCI indicator is the high-low average. I'm just choosing price close here, but that's an input, so when you run this you can change that to whatever you like. The next is the fast moving average. And as a moving average it has a number of periods, and I'm declaring that as a default 14, the same as the CCI. Change that as you need. There are two other inputs to a moving average. One of those is the method to be used, and I'm going to be declaring these as exponential moving averages by default, and the second is the applied price, which I'm also using the closing price for the fast moving average. Then of course there's a slow moving average, which is exactly the same, but I just have a different default number of periods. And then finally there are the inputs that just apply to the trade. So I have a volume, magic number, and a trade comment. My volume, the default 0.01. Magic number, I've just put a number in here. You'll see some experts written where this magic number is not an input. I like to make it an input because although it's a fairly low chance that someone else will choose the same number that I'm choosing here, there is always that possibility, and so it's good to let the end user choose that number when they run it to make sure there's no conflict between this expert and some other expert that might be running. And finally a trade comment, which I'm just defaulting to the name of the expert advisor. Now in MetaTrader 4 there is then nothing to do in the onInit section, but there are some things to do in MetaTrader 5 because the indicators are handled differently in MetaTrader 5, so we'll switch across to that now. Now in MetaTrader 5 I've already added the inputs. They're exactly the same as they were for MetaTrader 4, so there's no need to go through those. But the indicators in MetaTrader 5 are handled more as a background task. So you set up the indicator, it runs in the background, and then you simply call on it to get values, where in MetaTrader 4 you call the indicator with all the information and execute it each time you want to get a value. So I'm going to set up some global variables first to hold the handles to the indicators and the buffers where the values are going to be extracted from those indicators. So a handle to the fast moving average, a handle to the slow moving average, and a handle to the CCI indicator. and then buffers for each of those: fast moving average, slow moving average, and the CCI buffer. And next there are some changes in the on init section to simply set up these indicators. So first I'm declaring a handle to the fast moving average. The arguments here are almost the same as the arguments you would pass in MT4. There's only the bar number or index that's missing from this. So I'm saying that I'm passing in the current symbol from the chart, the period from the chart, the number of MA periods that were entered as an input. I'm having a shift of 0. I typically don't use shift, so I set that to 0. The method and the price. So that will give me a handle back to the fast moving average. Now I'll do the same for the slow moving average. And the CCI, which obviously has different inputs, it still has the symbol and the chart period, but then the number of periods for the CCI and the applied price for that. Now, if any of those fail, I'll get an invalid handle returned. So I'm testing that, saying if I get the fast moving average or the slow moving average or the CCI returns an invalid handle. Now I could have tested this after creating each one. I've just found it easier to write it here. Then I'm just going to print an error message and return init failed, and that will cause the expert advisor to simply terminate at that point. Also, when these are returned, they are not returned as a series, and that means that index number 0 is not on the right or where you would see it if you look at the screen. So I like to have them aligned to the bars on the screen. So bar number 0 is the rightmost bar on the chart, and I like then the values in these arrays to come out with number 0 being the last entry rather than the first. And I can do that simply by setting them as series. Now that has no effect on the way these are calculated or the results. It just repositions number zeros from being the first to the last element in the array, and then I can align them easily to the chart. In some cases it doesn't matter, but if you want to compare to something like close, the close function takes a number which gives you a right hand aligned index. So I like to use array set as series and set these buffers to true. And then the last thing to do here, I'm using that trade object or the ctrade class and the trade object to execute trades. In the calls to execute those trades, there is no place to enter the magic number, so I just set that once as a property on the object here. So I set the expert magic number, and then every trade I execute through this will use that same magic number. And now also in MetaTrader 5, because I've set up the indicators using handles, which you need to do, I need to release those handles when I've finished. And that's simply the indicator release function passing in the handle. And I'll do that for the fast, the slow, and the CCI. Now back in MetaTrader 4, let me cover some utility functions that I'm going to be used before we go anywhere else, just to avoid any confusion over what they might be. And the first is the new bar function. I use this a lot. And this is simply going to tell me if I have a new bar, as in on the time frame of the chart, if a new bar has been created. So I'm declaring a static variable of type date time that I'm calling current, and I'm initializing that to 0. So the first time this comes in, that time has a value of 0, which is 1970. And because this is a static variable, if I reset that value, it will remember the new value next time it comes in here. So I'm starting with 0, and then I'm declaring another date time variable, which is now, and I'm getting that from bar number 0 on the chart using current symbol, current period, and bar number 0. So this tells me the open time for the current chart bar. And then I'm simply doing a comparison. If the open time for the current chart bar is the same as the current time that I've saved, then I haven't got a new bar, and I'll just return false. If they're different, then it will fall through to these next lines, and I then assign the current opening time to this current variable, and because it's a static, that will be remembered next time I come into this function. This initialization only happens once. And if these two were different and I've fallen through here, then I'll just return true. So that tells me I've got a new bar. So that's a standard function. I use it a lot. There are two other very simple utility functions that I'm going to show you. Symbol ask and symbol bid. Now in MetaTrader 4 there is a variable called ask and one called bid that will give you this information, but I want to maintain some level of compatibility between my MT4 and MT5 code. So in MT5 that ask and bid variable don't exist, but there is a function called symbol info double, passing in the symbol and asking for symbol ask or symbol bid. So I'm wrapping that up in a function that I'm just calling symbol ask and symbol bid, and then I can declare these two functions in both my MT4 and MT5 and use them in both places. So now we'll go back to the onTick section and see the code that we need to write in there. Now in onTick, first thing I want to do is check that we can actually trade. There are certain times of the day where my broker has a certain shutdown, and that typically happens at the beginning of the day, and that also happens at the beginning of a bar. So if I come in here at the beginning of that bar and attempt to make a trade, it will simply fail, and I might as well just avoid that time period. So there is a function called terminal info integer, and I can ask terminal trade allowed and cast that to a boolean, and if that's not true then I know that I can't trade. So it means I can't open new trades, I can't close existing trades either, so I might as well wait until that's cleared. In MetaTrader 4 there is a function called isTradeAllowed. It actually returns the same value as this. So again, to maintain compatibility between MT4 and MT5, I'm using this terminal info integer function rather than the isTradeAllowed. The next, I want to create two variables for the moving average cross and the CCI cross. And you see I've declared them here as static. As I said, I don't need both of these to happen at the same time. I just need one to happen and then the other. So by declaring them as static, as soon as one of them happens, I'll set that value and it will hold that value then as a static variable until the next happens. So I'm declaring two static variables, integers MA cross and CCI cross. I'm declaring them as integers because I'm actually going to set them to 1 if they cross up and -1 if they cross down, and 0 means that I'm in a neutral state. So here's the new bar. I'm capturing that as a variable. If I'm only using it once, I can simply say if new bar, but just out of habit I capture this because sometimes I have code where I want to use it more than one time. If I call this function a second time, it's going to return false. So I capture it in a variable and then I can just use that variable through this loop. So if it's a new bar, and this is MetaTrader 4 code, and we'll move to the MetaTrader 5 version in a moment, then I get my CCI value, and in this case I'm asking for the CCI using the iCCI function for the symbol, period, the input CCI period and the CCI price, and I'm asking for the value from bar number 1. I also want the CCI for bar number 2, and that's because I'm looking for a cross. I'm not simply looking to see if it's above or below, I'm looking to see that it has crossed here. And then I want to check for the cross happening. So if CCI 1, the most recent from the bar that's just closed, is greater than 0, and CCI 2 from the bar before that is less than or equal to 0, then we've crossed above, so CCI cross is equal to 1. And if CCI 1 is less than 0 and CCI 2 is greater than or equal to 0, then CCI cross gets the -1 value. Now I'm doing the same thing with the moving averages. I want bar number 1 moving average value and bar number 2 moving average value, and I need this for both the fast and the slow moving average. So here I've just picked up the bar number 1 value for fast moving average using the IMA function, passing in the symbol from the chart with symbol bracket bracket, and the current chart period with period bracket bracket, passing in the fast moving average periods we wanted, 0 for shift, moving average method and price, and I'm getting this value for bar number 1. Picking up the same thing for bar number 2 simply by changing the index number, and then the slow moving average, and the difference here of course I'm using the slow periods, slow method and slow price, but I'm also picking that up for bar number 1, and then I'll get that same value for bar number 2. Now I want to test if these have crossed. So if the fast moving average 1 is above slow moving average 1 and fast moving average 2 was not, then I'm setting the moving average cross. But also remember that part of the strategy is to close trades when the moving averages cross. So as well as setting the MA cross value to 1, meaning it's crossed up, I'm going to close the sell trades. And we'll see this close trades function in a moment as well. And then I do the same thing if the fast moving average has crossed below, but I do it in reverse. So here the MA cross is -1. I'm closing the order type buy trades. And then finally, I want to open a trade if both of these crosses are true. So if the MA cross is not 0, meaning it's at least 1 or -1, and it's the same as the CCI cross. So if the CCI cross is -1 and the MA cross is 1, then I don't want to open a trade. They both have to be the same. Or if the CCI cross is 0, meaning I haven't got a value for that yet, then this won't execute. Then I'm simply going to open a trade, and I'm passing in the moving average cross so that the open trade function knows whether it's opening a buy or a sell trade. I don't need to pass the CCI cross because they must be the same to get to this point. And I'm getting a value back from the open trade. So if that's greater than 0, meaning it's successful, then I'm resetting the moving average cross and the CCI cross to 0. So they're both sitting there now waiting for the next event to happen. And that's everything in the on tick section. I'm going to move across now to the MetaTrader 5, and it's largely the same, certainly in structure, but there are some functional differences. Now in MT5, I've already inserted the new bar function and the symbol ask and symbol bid. The first test, the terminal info integer, that's exactly the same as it was for MetaTrader 4. I'm still declaring static variables for MA cross and CCI cross. And I'm still calling the new bar function and assigning the value to new bar. Now here's the difference though in the use of the indicators. I don't need to call the iCCI function here because I called that above to set up the background indicator in MetaTrader 5. What I do need is to copy the values from that handle. So the handle CCI, I'm copying the values from that into the buffer that I set up, the buffer CCI. And I'm copying buffer number 0 from the CCI indicator. It only has one buffer, so that's buffer number 0. And I'm copying that from position 0 for 3 values because I want values 0, 1, and 2, 3 values. And then I'm simply extracting the values for my CCI1 from that buffer. So CCI1 is coming from position 1 in buffer CCI. And this is why I reversed the order of these arrays so that this would match the bar numbers on screen. And then the same for CCI2. And then the same condition. If CCI1 is greater than 0 and CCI2 is not, then I've got a positive cross and a negative cross for the opposite. And now I need to do the same thing with the moving average buffers. Exactly the same thing here. Moving averages have only one buffer, so this is buffer number 0. I'm beginning at position 0 for 3 values, copying those into the fast moving average buffer. And the same for the slow moving average buffer. Again, 3 values copied into the slow buffer. And then I simply extract those values from the buffer arrays. And after that, I have exactly the same condition that I had in MetaTrader 4. I'm comparing the fast moving average with the slow moving average for bar 1. And if that is higher and the bar 2 fast moving average is not higher than the slow moving average, then I have a cross above. So MA cross is 1. And again, I call closed trades. The difference here is only that I'm using position type sell rather than order type sell. And then the same for a buy position, but again, I'm using position type buy in MetaTrader 5 rather than order type buy. And now for the open section, again, this condition is the same. If MA cross is not 0 and MA cross is equal to CCI cross, then I've had both of these conditions met and they're both in the same direction. Then I'm calling open trade, also passing in MA cross, and then I'm resetting both of the cross values to 0. And that's everything in the on init section. So the key differences between MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5 here were the use of the copy buffer to get the values from the indicators rather than calling the indicators directly, and then replacing order types with position types. So now let's go back to MetaTrader 4 first, and I will show the closed trades and then the open trade, and I'll switch back to MetaTrader 5 and show those as well. All right, now in MetaTrader 4, first let's look at the closed trade function. This takes an order type, so I'm passing in enum order type, and that's the type. I'm just declaring a variable to hold the result of this so it can be passed back so you know if the close has been successful. And I'm calculating the closing price. I just want to know which price all the trades should be closed at. If this is a buy type order, then my closing price is the bid price, and if not, then it's the ask price. So if the type passed in is equal to order type buy, and I'm using the ternary operator, this question mark. So I've got a condition followed by the question mark. If this condition is true, so if it's a buy, then the closing price is the bid price. And if that's false, then it must be a sell, and the closing price is the ask price. I'm declaring a variable where I'm capturing the total number of orders that I have. Now this is not just orders placed by this expert, this is the total number of all orders that I have. So I need to scan through those and find the orders relevant to this expert. So I'm having a standard loop here for int I equals count minus 1 because it's an array, and count gives me the total number of elements, but the last element is equal to count minus 1 and the first element is 0. So I'm going backwards, beginning at count minus 1, as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, 0 being the last element, and I'm counting backwards by using I minus minus here. Then I need to get that order into memory, and that's with the order select function. So the order select function has a couple of variations. The one I'm using passes in a position number and select by position, and asking for mode trades. You can also ask for history. So remember to call for mode trades if you're selecting by position. And I've got this not operator here. Order select returns true or false. If that fails, then I don't want to process further in this loop because it means I don't have an order to work on. So I'm simply saying if not order select, then I'm setting the result to false, which means that when this returns, I'll know that somewhere my closed trades has failed. I don't necessarily know where. You could put more error handling in here, but it means that there is at least one order out there that I couldn't read. Because I couldn't read it, I don't know if it's an order I need to work on or not, so I'm just going to return false. And then continue will mean that it exits this loop and comes back to the next iteration of this for loop. And the next thing then, I need to compare that this is a trade that was placed by this expert advisor. And to do that, I'm comparing the order symbol value with order symbol bracket bracket not equal to the current chart symbol, or if the order magic number is not equal to my input magic number, so both using this not equals. If it fails either of these tests, then I'll just continue, which will again go back to the beginning of the loop. Now, if the order type is equal to the type passed in, so remember I'm only either closing sell or buy at one time. So if the order type is the correct type, then I can close that order. So I'm using the order close function, passing the order ticket, ticket number, the number of lots for the order, and the closing price that was calculated above, and slippage. I'm using this ampersand equals. So remember, result is a Boolean. This order close may fail for various reasons. If that fails, it will return a false. And if result is already true, then this ampersand equal means true and false equals false. So it will set the result to false, and it will stay false then, because the next time it comes through, even if the order close is successful, then result is already false, and then the answer is false and true, which is also false. So using the ampersand equal will simply set result to false the first time it fails, and it will stay false, and then when I get to the end of the function, I'll return with a false value. And then I just return the result at the end, and that's the order close function. And let's go to MetaTrader 5. There is a slight difference, so I'll show that as well. Okay, so now in MetaTrader 5, the close trades function. It's the same, a Boolean close trades, but in this case the passed in value is an enum position type, not an order type. I'm declaring the result variable as true to begin with. Now I'm using the positions total value to get the total number of positions, not the orders total. And I'm counting backwards, the same thing for I equals count minus 1 down to 0 using I minus minus. But then there's a different select operator. This is position get ticket. It still takes a position number, I, and it returns the ticket number for that position. So and the ticket number is a U-long type value. So I'm declaring the ticket number here and using position get ticket to return that ticket number. This call also loads that position into memory. So now that position is ready for me to look at and determine if it's one that I need to process. But if the position get ticket fails, then I'll get a ticket number that's less than or equal to 0, actually 0. So I'm then testing if ticket is less than or equal to 0, then I'm failing at this point, and that's the same as in MetaTrader 4 where I had if I couldn't order select. So again, result false and continue. Now I need to check this symbol and the magic number for this position the same way that I did in orders in MetaTrader 4. And here's where I'm using that position info variable that I created earlier. This holds the values of the current selected position. And so the position info.symbol, and remember the brackets here because this is a function. So if that's not equal to the current chart symbol, or the position info magic, and that's also a function, is not equal to the input magic number, then this is not a position that I want to process. So I'll just continue. And then again, a test on the position info.position type. So if this is the correct type and matches the type passed in, then result ampersand equals trade.position close. So this is the trade object that I created at the beginning of the code, and the position close is a method on that, and all that requires is a ticket number because the trade object will work out the closing price for that ticket and the volume. So I'm simply calling trade.position close with that ticket number, and that returns a value that I can put into the result. And then I just return the result at the end. So that's the close function for MetaTrader 5. Now I'll go back to MetaTrader 4 and we'll look at the open function there. And here in MetaTrader 4, the open function, it's quite simple. I said that I was passing in the moving average cross value, so I know whether this is a positive or a negative cross. That tells me if I need to open a buy or a sell. So if the MA cross is less than 0, I'm opening a sell, and so I'm calling the order send function, passing the symbol, order type sell, the input volume. I'm using the symbol bid function to get the open price for a sell. So sells open at the bid price, buy opens at the ask price. I have no stop loss, take profit, or slippage value. I'm setting all of those to 0, and I'm passing in the trade comment and the magic number. And then I'm returning the value that comes back from order send. Order send returns the ticket number that's created, and I get a 0 or negative number if that was unsuccessful. So I'm simply returning that here, putting a return statement around that, closing bracket. Because if I am opening a sell trade, I don't need to look at any further code. Once I execute this statement, I can simply return. And then if MA cross is greater than 0, I want to do the same thing for a buy. So if order send symbol order type buy in this case, and using symbol ask. As I said, ask is the open price for a buy. Everything else is the same as it is for the sell, and I'm also returning the value from that. And if I happen to fall through here and the cross is not negative or positive, now that should have been picked up before I called this, because I'm only calling it if MA cross is not 0. But just in case I've come in here and it is not negative or positive, it must be 0. I'm just returning 0, which simply indicates that I didn't have a successful open trade. So now let's see the same thing in MetaTrader 5. Very similar, but some slight differences. Now in MetaTrader 5. So first thing, the open trade function is going to return a Boolean in this case. But otherwise, the argument there, moving average cross, is the same. Same condition if moving average cross is less than 0. Now here I use the trade object again, and I'm attempting to open a position using that, passing in the chart symbol. Order type sell, so I'm trying to sell a position. Volume, passing in the symbol bid price, which is the correct price for a sell. No stop loss and no take profit here, and I'm passing in the trade comment. You'll notice there's no argument here for magic number. I mentioned that earlier, that I set the magic number on the trade object at the beginning of this code, because there is no place to pass that into this function. And this trade.positionOpen returns a Boolean, which is why the open trade function returns a Boolean. And I'm simply returning trade.positionOpen for the sell trade here. And then exactly the same for the buy trade, but here I'm passing order type buy and using symbol ask as the price. And just in case it's gone through and MA cross is 0, I'm actually returning true. I could return false, but I'm returning true in this case. And that's the open trade function completely for MetaTrader 5. So now I've switched back to MetaTrader 4. That should be everything. I'll just compile these to make sure I haven't got a mistake in there. So MetaTrader 4 compiles, and MetaTrader 5 also compiles. And you've seen this running earlier. So that's a complete expert advisor to compare CCI crossing 0 with two moving averages crossing each other. There are of course a lot of variations to that simple strategy. You could set a CCI value non-zero, so you might only want to trade if CCI crosses above 50 or below -50, that kind of thing. You might only want to trade if they both cross at the same time, or only if the CCI crosses before the moving average, and so on. If you have particular variations on this that you know of that you'd like to see me incorporate into this, I might revisit this particular expert advisor in the future. But otherwise, this is a simple working example. You can build on this and make it your own strategy. But remember, as I said, I'm not promoting or recommending the strategy here. This is just an example for the programming. If you got value from this, hit that like button, please. And if you want to see more of our videos, then subscribe. And if you click the bell icon, you'll actually be notified when we release the next video. So until the next time, thank you for watching.